I built a home for a dream that never existed because there was never a faithful wife.
My wife Sarah and I had been married for 3 years, together for 5 total. I genuinely thought we had a solid relationship despite some rocky patches here and there. I'm a contractor by trade and worked my A off to provide for us, pulling 60-hour weeks, taking weekend jobs, doing whatever it took to keep us comfortable and building toward our future together. When Sarah got pregnant 9 months ago, I was absolutely over the moon. This was everything I dreamed of since I was a kid. A family, a future, the whole American dream package. I threw myself completely into preparing for our son's arrival. Built the entire nursery from scratch over the course of 2 months, hand sanding every piece of trim until it was smooth as silk, painting the walls this soft, sage green color that Sarah picked out after changing her mind 4 different times. I didn't mind the changes. I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect for her and our baby. I'd stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning assembling furniture because she kept rearranging the layout, trying different configurations until she found the one that felt right. The crib alone took me 3 solid weeks to build by hand. I'm talking about selecting each piece of wood individually, measuring twice and cutting once, sanding everything down to baby-safe smoothness. I carved little stars and moons into the headboard, added decorative elements that would catch the light from the window just right. Every night I'd stand in that doorway, picturing myself reading bedtime stories to our son in that room, teaching him to count the stars on his crib, watching him take his first steps across that floor I'd refinished myself. I also built a changing table with hidden storage compartments, installed floating shelves at the perfect height, and even constructed a toy chest with safety hinges so little fingers wouldn't get pinched. The mobile above the crib was hand-painted by me during lunch breaks at work, wooden planets and stars and soft blues and yellows that would rotate gently with any breeze from the window. I organized books by age group on the shelves, from board books for infants all the way up to chapter books for when he got older. But here's where things get complicated. Sarah had this friend, Marcus, who'd been in her life since their college days at State University. According to her, they were practically siblings, just best friends who'd never crossed any lines. But something about their dynamic always made me uncomfortable. He had this way of looking at her like she was the only person in the room, and she'd get this glow about her whenever he showed up unannounced at our house, which happened way too often for my liking. Marcus would text Sarah at all hours, 11 p.m. on weeknights, 6 a.m. on weekends, during dinner when we were trying to have couple time. Her phone would buzz, and she'd immediately grab it with this smile I rarely saw anymore when she looked at me. They had inside jokes that went back years, shared memories from college that seemed way more intimate than normal friendship allowed. When I'd ask about their history, she'd always deflect, saying I wouldn't understand because I hadn't been there. The red flags were everywhere, if I'm being honest. Sarah would come home from team dinners at work, smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. Her hair would be different, like someone had run their fingers through it, and she'd have this dreamy look in her eyes. When I'd ask how her evening went, she'd give vague answers about boring work stuff, then immediately shower and go to bed without much conversation. Her phone habits changed too. She started taking it everywhere, to the bathroom, to bed, even to get a glass of water in the kitchen. It was always face down on surfaces, and if I walked into a room while she was texting, she'd quickly minimize whatever she was looking at. When I brought up my concerns, she'd flip it around on me, saying I was being paranoid and controlling, that Marcus was just a friend, and if I couldn't handle her having male friends, that was my problem to work through. Looking back, I can see how she was gaslighting me. Every time my gut told me something was off, she'd make me feel crazy for noticing. She'd say things like, "You're imagining things," or "Why can't you just trust me?" Or, "Marcus has been in my life longer than you have, and he'll be here long after you if you keep acting like this." That last one should have been a massive red flag, but I was so desperate to believe her that I convinced myself I was being unreasonable. The pregnancy announcement was when things really shifted. We'd been trying for about 6 months, and when that test came back positive, I literally dropped to my knees in our living room and cried tears of joy. This was everything I'd ever wanted. But Sarah's reaction was muted. She smiled and hugged me, but something felt off. Later that night, I caught her on the phone with Marcus, whispering in the kitchen while she thought I was asleep. All I heard was, "Need to figure out what we're going to do," before she noticed me and quickly hung up. When I asked who she was talking to, she said it was her sister Emma discussing baby shower plans. But Emma lived in Portland and it was 2 a.m. there. The lie was so obvious it hurt, but I swallowed it because I didn't want to start a fight when we should have been celebrating. For the baby shower, I decided to pull out every single stop. This was going to be Sarah's moment to shine, her day to feel like absolute royalty. I spent 3 weeks building a pergola in our backyard from scratch, measuring, cutting, sanding, staining every board until it was magazine-worthy. I restained our entire deck, power washed everything, and hung over 500 individual fairy lights in patterns I'd sketched out and planned meticulously. I hired caterers from Bella Vista, this upscale Italian place downtown that was Sarah's favorite restaurant. We're talking about antipasto platters, gourmet sandwiches, fresh fruit arrangements, and this incredible lemon cake that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. I created a playlist that told the story of our entire relationship. Songs from our first date, our wedding dance, our honeymoon in Tuscany, mixed with newer tracks about parenthood and family. The whole setup took me 4 days of working after my regular job. I'd come home at 6 p.m. and work until midnight getting everything perfect. The pergola had climbing roses that I'd trained to wrap around the posts. The lighting created this warm golden glow that made everything look magical. And I'd even rented proper table linens in China because Sarah mentioned once that she thought paper plates were tacky for important events. The day of the shower, about 45 people showed up. Both of our families, friends from work, college buddies, neighbors we'd grown close to over the years. Sarah looked absolutely stunning in this flowing white dress that highlighted her pregnancy glow perfectly. I remember standing by the drink station watching her laugh and chat with guests, thinking about how incredibly lucky I was that this amazing woman was carrying my child. I was the guy working behind the scenes, refilling ice buckets, making sure the food stayed fresh, taking photos of Sarah with different groups of people. I didn't mind being in the background. This was her day, and I wanted her to feel celebrated and loved. Every smile on her face made all the prep work worth it. Marcus showed up about an hour into the party. I watched Sarah's whole demeanor change when she spotted him walking through the back gate. Her posture straightened, her smile got brighter, and she practically floated over to greet him like he was some kind of celebrity. He brought this elaborate gift basket that probably cost twice what anyone else spent, and Sarah gushed over it like it was the most thoughtful thing she'd ever received. As the afternoon went on, I noticed Sarah gravitating toward Marcus constantly. They'd find quiet corners to talk, share looks across the yard, and laugh at things nobody else seemed to find funny. Her mom even commented to me about how nice it was that Sarah had such a good friend, but there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with their dynamic either. Then came time for toasts. This was the moment I'd been looking forward to all day. I figured Sarah would thank everyone for coming, maybe get emotional about becoming a mom, possibly even acknowledge all the work I'd put into making the day special. I had my phone ready to record what I thought would be a beautiful memory we'd watch back for years to come. Sarah stood up with her champagne flute filled with sparkling cider, tapped it with a fork to get everyone's attention, and waited for the conversations to die down. The whole backyard went quiet. 45 people all focused on the glowing pregnant woman in white. Then she looked directly at Marcus, who was sitting at one of the front tables, and said in a clear, carrying voice, "I want to thank the most important man in my life. This is the man I wish I had married, the only true father my son will ever know." The silence that followed was deafening. I'm talking about the kind of quiet where you can hear individual leaves rustling in the breeze, where someone's ice clinking in their glass sounds like a gunshot. Every single person at that party turned to stare. Some at Sarah, some at Marcus, some at me standing there like a deer in headlights with a serving spoon in my hand. I kept waiting for the punchline, for her to laugh and say, "Just kidding," or "Got you all worried there." But she didn't. She raised her glass toward Marcus with this radiant smile, and about half the guests awkwardly clinked their glasses while the other half sat there looking mortified. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his face red as a tomato, but he didn't stand up to correct her or defend me. He just sat there and accepted the toast like it was his due. My chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself. The serving spoon fell out of my hand and clattered onto the concrete. I could feel 44 pairs of eyes waiting to see what I would do, how I would react to being publicly humiliated at what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. Some of our friends looked genuinely shocked and horrified. Others, mostly Sarah's college crowd, just nodded along like this was perfectly normal. I set down the pitcher of lemonade I'd been holding and walked away. Didn't make a scene, didn't yell, didn't demand explanations. I just walked through the side gate I'd built with my own hands and left my own party. The fairy lights I'd hung were starting to twinkle as the sun set. The music I'd curated was still playing. The food I'd paid for was still being eaten. But I was done being part of it. Nobody followed me. Nobody called my name. Nobody came to check if I was okay. I could have walked into traffic and it wouldn't have registered on their radar. The night air felt cold against my skin as I made my way around to the front of the house, the laughter and conversations from my backyard fading into background noise. That night, I sat in the nursery I'd spent months perfecting. The smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air, mixed with the scent of the new furniture I'd assembled piece by careful piece. I looked at the mobile slowly rotating above the crib, the bookshelf organized with military precision, the rocking chair I'd driven 3 hours round trip to pick up because Sarah mentioned liking it once in passing. All of it felt like a monument to my own stupidity. How long had I been building a dream that Sarah never shared? How many nights had I stood in this doorway imagining reading bedtime stories to our son while she was texting another man? How many hours had I spent sanding tiny crib rails while she was planning a future that didn't include me as anything more than a wallet and a seed donor? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in that rocking chair until dawn, listening to it creak as I processed the complete destruction of everything I thought my life was. By the time the sun came up, I had absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. I went to my home office and pulled out the good stationery I'd bought months ago to write birth announcements. Seemed fitting to use it for a different kind of announcement. I wrote, "Sarah, you will never own my silence again. You will never mistake my kindness for weakness. You will never see me as less than the man I am." I sealed the letter in an envelope and carried it downstairs to the kitchen counter, right next to the wilted flowers from the baby shower. Here's the thing nobody at that party knew. The house was solely in my name. I'd purchased it 18 months before I even met Sarah, and I'd never added her to the deed despite her hints over the years about making it official. The mortgage was mine, the insurance was mine, every repair and improvement had been funded by my income alone. Legally, she had absolutely no claim to the property. Over the next week, I methodically removed Sarah from everything. I called the bank and took her off our joint checking account, leaving her access to the savings account so she wouldn't be completely stranded. I removed her from my health insurance, my life insurance, my car insurance. I changed the locks on the house and the garage. I transferred the utility bills into my name only. Every legal tie between us got severed with surgical precision. The morning after the party, Sarah came downstairs around 9 a.m. humming some Taylor Swift song like absolutely nothing had happened. She was still in her pajamas, hair in a messy bun, that post-sleep glow that I used to find so attractive. She went straight to the refrigerator for orange juice, completely oblivious to the envelope sitting prominently on the kitchen counter next to her coffee mug. When she finally noticed it, the humming stopped dead. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my own coffee, fully dressed for work, watching her face as she read the letter and examined the attached copy of the house deed. The color drained from her cheeks as reality hit her. For probably the first time in our relationship, Sarah was completely speechless. "You can't be serious," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands were shaking as she held the papers. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "I am. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live." Then I stood up, rinsed my coffee mug in the sink, grabbed my work bag, and headed out the door like it was any other Tuesday morning. That evening, I came home to find Sarah sitting in our living room with tears streaming down her face, the letter spread out on the coffee table like evidence in a crime scene. She'd been waiting for me, probably expecting me to walk through the door, ready to take it all back, to apologize for overreacting, to beg her to stay. Instead, I walked past her to the kitchen and started making dinner for one. She followed me, talking rapidly about how she'd misspoken at the party, how she was emotional and overwhelmed, how she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Every word felt like sand in my ears. I'd heard variations of these excuses for 3 years every time Marcus's name came up, every time she came home late, every time my gut told me something was wrong. "I love you," she kept saying. "You know I love you. You're my husband. You're the father of my baby." But love isn't just words, and being a husband isn't just a title on a marriage certificate. Love is shown through actions, through choices, through who you elevate and who you diminish. And Sarah had made her choice crystal clear in front of 45 people. A few days later, she came back with Marcus in tow. The absolute audacity of bringing him to my doorstep after what had happened still takes my breath away. They stood on the porch I'd built, under the light fixture I'd installed, probably strategizing about how to manipulate me back into submission. Marcus tried to play the role of reasonable mediator, talking about the baby's well-being and thinking rationally and not making permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. He had this condescending tone like he was the adult in the room, and I was some child having a tantrum. I let him finish his whole practice speech, then looked him dead in the eye and said, "You already told everyone you'd be the father. Start acting like it." The look on his face was priceless. This was the moment he realized that actions have consequences, that Sarah's public declaration had made him responsible for the situation he'd helped create. I shut the door in both their faces and went back to my evening routine like they'd never been there. Sarah tried the solo approach a week later. She showed up around dinner time with red eyes and mascara streaks, looking every inch the abandoned pregnant woman. For just a second, I felt that old instinct to comfort her, to pull her into my arms and tell her we'd figure it out together. But then I remembered her standing in my backyard, raising her glass to another man while I stood invisible in the background. "Do you still love me?" she asked, her voice breaking on the words. It was such a loaded question, designed to make me feel guilty for protecting myself. The Sarah I fell in love with 5 years ago. Maybe I still had feelings for that version of her. But the woman standing on my porch, the one who'd publicly humiliated me and was now trying to manipulate me back into compliance? I felt nothing but pity for her. "No," I told her honestly. "I love someone I thought you were, but that person was never real." She tried to argue, to explain away 3 years of lies and emotional affairs, but I was done listening to stories that made her the sufferer and me the villain. Some things can't be unbroken, especially when only one person was ever trying to hold them together. She packed her belongings over the next 2 weeks, moving slowly like she was hoping I'd change my mind with each box she filled. I watched her sort through our shared life, deciding what belonged to her and what belonged to the house. Every picture frame that left the walls, every piece of clothing that disappeared from the closet, every personal item that got packed away felt like lifting another weight off my shoulders. The hardest part was the nursery. Taking down that hand-painted mobile, boxing up the tiny clothes with tags still attached, disassembling the crib I'd spent 3 weeks crafting. It felt like burying a dream, but it was a dream built on lies. And I needed it gone. I packed everything carefully, labeled each box clearly, and stacked them by the front door so there'd be no confusion about ownership. After Sarah moved out, I spent a weekend converting the nursery into a home office. I brought in my desk from the garage, set it up by the window where the crib used to be, and lined the shelves with my work manuals and personal books. It felt like reclaiming territory I'd lost without even realizing it. Every corner of the house was mine again. My buddy Derek stopped by one evening while I was setting up the office space. He'd been at the baby shower, witnessed the whole disaster, and was one of the few people who'd actually reached out afterward to check on me. He stood in the doorway looking at the transformation and shook his head. "Man, I still can't believe she said that in front of everyone," he said. "The ball's on that woman. But you know what? You're handling this like a champion. A lot of guys would have lost their crap and done something stupid." He was right. I could have screamed, could have thrown Marcus out physically, could have made a scene that would have followed me for years. Instead, I chose dignity and let my actions speak louder than any tantrum ever could. The 30-day deadline came and went without drama. No desperate phone calls, no showing up drunk at my door, no attempts at emotional blackmail, just blessed silence. It was the kind of quiet I'd been craving for years without even realizing it. The absence of walking on eggshells, of wondering where she really was, of competing for attention in my own marriage. About 6 weeks after Sarah moved out, I ran into her sister Emma at the grocery store. Emma and I had always gotten along well, and she looked genuinely uncomfortable when she spotted me in the produce section. We made awkward small talk for a few minutes before she cleared her throat and said, "Listen, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I think you deserve to know what's really going on." Turns out Marcus had been married the entire time. His wife Jennifer had filed for divorce 3 days after someone posted video of the baby shower on Facebook, and the whole thing had become a social media nightmare. Sarah was living in some extended stay hotel near the airport, trying to figure out her next move while Marcus dealt with his own imploding marriage. She really screwed herself, Emma said quietly. Lost her husband, her home, and the guy she thought she wanted all in one weekend. Meanwhile, you're out here thriving. It was true. I'd gotten a promotion at work, started dating a nice woman named Lisa from my gym, and taken up serious woodworking as a hobby. I'd built myself a workshop in the garage that had become my personal sanctuary. The irony wasn't lost on me that Sarah had gotten exactly what she publicly declared she wanted. She'd wanted Marcus to be the only real father her son would know. Mission accomplished. She'd wanted a different husband. She was free to pursue that dream. I'd simply removed the safety net she'd taken for granted. Me. Always there to catch her when her choices had consequences. People in our social circle had opinions about the situation, of course. Some called me heartless for abandoning a pregnant woman, but those people hadn't lived in my marriage for 3 years. They hadn't watched their spouse's face light up for another man day after day. They hadn't been publicly humiliated at what should have been one of the happiest celebrations of their lives. The ones who mattered understood. Derek, my brother Mike, even my mother-in-law pulled me aside at a family gathering to say she thought Sarah had lost her mind and that I deserved better. These were people who'd watched our relationship up close and seen the dynamic I'd been too close to recognize. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Sarah reached out through a lawyer demanding child support. She had the nerve to claim I was the father and owed financial support, despite having publicly declared Marcus as the only true father in front of dozens of witnesses. My attorney had a field day with that one. He forwarded her lawyer the baby shower video, along with written statements from several attendees who'd heard her toast. The legal response was beautiful in its simplicity. Mrs. Johnson publicly declared at the baby shower that Mr. Marcus Williams was the only true father her child would ever know. We defer to her public statement regarding paternity and suggest she direct any support requests to Mr. Williams. Haven't heard a word back since then. The rebuild process wasn't just about the physical space. It was about reclaiming my entire identity. I started therapy about 2 months after Sarah moved out, not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to understand how I'd allowed myself to become so invisible in my own marriage. Dr. Martinez helped me see patterns I'd been blind to, how I'd consistently prioritized Sarah's comfort over my own self-respect, how I'd interpreted her criticism as guidance rather than manipulation. One breakthrough came when we talked about the nursery renovation. You turned a room that represented broken dreams into a space for new possibilities, she observed. That's not just practical, that's symbolic of your entire approach to this situation. You're not dwelling on what was lost, you're building what comes next. The woodworking hobby became my meditation. There's something deeply satisfying about taking raw lumber and creating something beautiful and functional through careful planning and patient work. I built a dining table for my kitchen to replace the one Sarah had picked out, then crafted matching chairs that actually fit my height properly. Every piece I completed felt like reclaiming another part of myself. I also started reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Turns out Sarah had been subtly discouraging those relationships for years, always finding reasons why I couldn't go to poker nights or weekend fishing trips. "You're so busy with work," she'd say, or, "I really need you home to help with X, Y, or Z." I'd accepted it as normal couple compromise, not recognizing it as isolation tactics. My friend Carlos from high school reached out after hearing about the divorce through mutual connections. "Man, I tried to stay in touch for the first year you were married, but you kept canceling plans last minute," he told me. Sarah always seemed to have some emergency that needed your attention right when we'd made plans. Looking back, those emergencies had never been that urgent, but I'd been so conditioned to drop everything for her that I hadn't questioned it. 6 months later, I'm living my best life. The house is peaceful in a way it never was when Sarah lived here. I sleep through the night without worrying about who's texting her at 2 a.m. I come home to silence that feels like freedom instead of tension. I've got my workshop, my hobbies, and I'm dating someone who actually seems excited to see me when I walk into a room. Sometimes I wonder about the baby, whether he's actually mine biologically or if the timeline doesn't add up with Sarah's relationship with Marcus. But honestly, I don't want to know. That chapter of my life is closed, and I'm writing a new one where I'm the protagonist instead of the supporting character in someone else's drama. Looking back, the best decision I ever made was walking away from that baby shower with dignity instead of making a scene. I could have yelled, could have demanded explanations, could have tried to fight for a marriage that was already over. Instead, I chose self-respect over drama, and it made all the difference. The house still has the pergola I built for that party. Sometimes I sit out there in the evenings with a beer, and instead of remembering the humiliation, I remember the craftsmanship. I built something beautiful with my own hands, and Sarah's betrayal can't take that away from me. Just like she can't take away the man I've become, someone who finally knows his own worth.